Hey there, and welcome back to another Rings of Power video. And today, we'll be talking through episode 3, which continues the mystery of the Southlands, and Galadriel's quest to hunt down Sauron, and is where I think the show started to really hit its stride a little bit more, and started to earn a touch more goodwill. Yeah, there's still a lot of hate, but there's also a lot more things that people are finding more enjoyable now. And so yeah, with all that being said, let's jump into the episode. So we start off the episode with a look into the Southlands where Arondir awakens in what can only be described as a worst case scenario, an orcish labour camp, surrounded by the citizens of Mordor who have been turned into slaves to start what I assume is the construction of Mordor, turning the region from a nice sort of grassland into a barren hellscape. He gets tossed around and beaten by a bunch of orcs who keep talking about their leader Adar, and who seem to require the slaves to work for them because they're not able to go out into the sunlight. It hurts them. And so after a bit of rough handling and a look at the terrorized humans, he gets tossed outside and encounters all his buddies from the Watchtower. And I gotta say, this is a very, very poor showing from the elves. Like, I get why Arondir was kidnapped. He went down the hole alone, and he never really had much of a chance in hindsight. But then his friends get taken too? Not exactly the best at their jobs if they were all kidnapped. And not only that, they were somehow taken long before he was. After all, they're already in the pit and have been working for some time. But he's still groggy from getting beaten. No wonder the orcs were able to return right under their noses with quality soldiers like these elves. Yeah. And honestly, this whole experience seems pretty awful. But at least they get to stand outside to dig, where they have less interaction with the orcs. We then cut to Galadriel, who's woken up after being found adrift at sea at the end of last episode. She and Halbrand are being held in a ship, where they've been given food and lodgings, before it's revealed that they were in fact picked up by Numenorians. Surprise, surprise. And that soon, they will arrive at the island kingdom itself. And that the captain has also nicked her brother's dagger, but no time to worry about that now, as they arrive in the city, and goddamn if this isn't one of the coolest places in Middle-earth history. Literally everything about this scene is just pure awesome. The music, the design of the city, the cinematography, perfection. I really loved it. It really just hammers in this idea that these people, they're not like the other races of men. They're a step above them. They're mythical, blessed by the divine. I mean, compare this to the Southlands village, or Rohan in the movies, or even Gondor, honestly. This place just seems a step above it all. And on top of that, I just love how massive and sprawling the city itself is. And even just the contrast between Elendil and Halbrand is enough to hammer that home, how different these two cultures really are. But then Galadriel outright says that to Halbrand's face, which, yeah, it's true, but you're not supposed to say that, Galadriel. Jesus, bit harsh. Anyway, as they walk through the city, we see Halbrand start to hone in on the blacksmith a little bit. I'm guessing he was a smith back in the day. And of course, this adds fuel to the fire that he is secretly Sauron. As now, he's both proven that he's manipulative and cunning, and he also has an interest in metalcraft. I'm not sure if I like the theory, but I do think it is very likely. And it would be kind of funny that after all the searching she does, it's Sauron who comes to Galadriel after all. Anyway, they make their way into the royal palace, which looks awesome, in order to have an audience with the nobility. But they find themselves barred from entering, forcing Elendil to reveal that Galadriel is an elf. Which, yeah, based on the exposition we got earlier, that's not a good thing. The Numenorians seem to dislike the elves at this point in the story. Halbrand, of course, has the quite reasonable opinion that they shouldn't antagonize these humans, as obviously they'll already be biased against them. So of course Galadriel goes and antagonizes them, immediately. Her Noldor pride kicking in as she starts to spout off about how the Numenorians kind of owe her and her people. Because realistically, according to Galadriel at least, it is because of the elves that they were even given the island to begin with, which of course turns into a verbal spar with the Queen, which turns into threats and demands, which almost turns to guards dragging them off to prison until Halbrand steps in to smooth things over, convincing the Queen and her council to weigh up the requests and get back to them in a few days' time. He then gives Elendil an awkward hug and steals back her dagger, before having some very intense eye contact with her where he tells her that they both deserve to find peace. I really hope they're not hinting at a romance between these two people. And also, back to the Sauron thing. I'm not sure I like it, but the more I see of him, the more he interacts with Galadriel, the more convinced I become that he is actually Sauron in disguise. They're setting us up for that big betrayal. We then have a brief look at the Queen Regent and her cousin discuss who Elendil is, and how he's of a noble line that's fallen into obscurity, before we get our first look at Isildur. And it is very nice to see a version of Isildur that isn't being lambasted for his mistakes after he got his hands on the One Ring. And so, instead of that version, the corrupted, power-hungry version, we get a new take on the character. He's a bit of a dreamer who keeps hearing the call of the sea and is a very skilled sailor in training who's probably the best in his class, which makes up for his lack of focus. Anyway, they sail their ship back to shore, and they all line up, and their instructor blows a shell horn thing, and they all call out, "The sea is always right," which, honestly, that was a bit corny. I don't know, it felt silly to see that, like they're a bunch of high school kids practicing sailing, not future sea guards for an island kingdom, but okay. Anyway, we see his sister, who I'm pretty sure is a completely original character, turn up to pick him up from his latest training before we cut back to Elendil, who's been taken into an audience with the Queen Regent, who kind of threatens him, implying he committed treason and that he's an elf sympathizer, which he probably is, but shh. She then tells him that she requires a service from him and gives him a sword, because that isn't ominous at all. But now it's back to the map to check on the Southlands again, where our elven friends are piecing together what's happened, and have figured out that the orcs are using the tunnels to move around the Southlands to both stay hidden and also avoid the sun. And I really like the detail that the orcs wear protective clothes when they stand outside. It's just a fun little detail. They're also apparently ransacking various different villages and digging, all in search for something for their leader, Adar. And I'm guessing that they're going to be looking for the sword that Theo has. I feel like that makes the most sense. The group then speculate that Sauron is this mysterious Adar, but honestly, I think that's probably not true. He's going to be somebody else. The group then decide that they'll try to get a glimpse over the trench, and then try to make their escape when the sun's at its peak and flee to the nearest tree line. Of course, standing in a cluster is a very terrible idea, especially when you're quite visibly and obviously talking, and so they draw the attention of the nearest angry orc, who yells at them to cut down the huge tree blocking the path of the dig. The leader elf refuses because elves like trees, and the orcs start to get angry. The elf then insults them back, which is not a very smart thing to do when you're trying to plan your escape, but okay. Before another orc approaches, laughing, and tells them that he shows strength, and so they all get a water ration. Right now. Yeah, this doesn't feel like a trap at all. The leader elf gets a drink, Arondir gets a drink, and Arondir's friend gets a drink, and a slashed artery. And down goes the first of our elves. Whew! That was quite unexpected, and also quite gruesome. I didn't actually expect that much blood, if I'm being honest. And I really liked this part. They build it up to make it look like the leader's going to get straight up murdered, only for the side character elf to suddenly and brutally get killed off. Whew, rest in peace to that guy. And so then Arondir goes and chops down the tree and manages to find a way for the crew to escape. So there's always a silver lining. Meanwhile, back on Numenor, Galadriel's made her prison guards look like buffoons as she's managed to escape them and made her way to the harbour to try and violently commandeer a ship like a true Noldor elf. Elendil, however, bamboozles her and manages to track her down, telling her that stealing a ship would be a very useless endeavour. And then on top of that, he manages to get through her arrogant and haughty exterior by speaking Elvish and telling her that they can visit the Hall of Lore together, as that's a place in Numenor where elves are still respected. Oh, and on top of that, she gets to ride a horse there, which gets her very excited, and leads into this episode's most memed out moment. A slow motion horse riding montage where they zoom in on Galadriel's face and she just has this massive goofy grin. And I've seen a lot of people mixed on this scene, and I get why. It is very jarring. But I do understand what they were trying to do. It's just, it comes across more like an ad for a fragrance than Middle-earth. And as this is all going on, Halbrand's trying his hardest to get himself employed by the local blacksmith. Man, he really is keen to start smithing. He gets more and more sus with every scene. Anyway, the smith tells him that until he earns a guild crest, he isn't allowed to forge steel in Numenor. And so I guess that earning the crest is probably something that takes a long time, probably years. And honestly, also probably requires some sort of recommendation to get started with, so it's not really looking realistic for him. So he goes off to have lunch instead, and gets accosted by a bunch of local guild dudes who start off with all the nice xenophobic things that people love to spout, calling him a low man, implying he's there to steal their jobs and money and women, and just leech off their glorious society. But of course, Halbrand manages to turn it around, and even steals the ringleader's guild crest, which, isn't the best idea, but they were arseholes, so it is hard to care. Until they follow him into an alleyway to teach him a lesson, and hit him once or twice before he snaps, and then beats the shit out of them, breaking arms, knees, smashing people's heads into bricks. Whew! Definitely more to him than you'd expect. But as all this is going on, we return to Galadriel and Elendil in the Hall of Lore, for a scene that basically serves as a major exposition dump. We get a little bit of backstory for Elrond as the pair discuss his brother Elros, the first king of Numenor and the man who built the Hall of Lore, And then we learn that the current king, or the previous king, it wasn't too clear, had been forced from the throne and lives under house arrest in his tower, simply because he was an elven fanboy. And the rest of the kingdom, or at least most of the rest of the kingdom, or the part that's in power, had a bit of an issue with him being an elven fanboy. And on top of that, we also get even more reason for Galadriel to go to the Southlands, but now we also have a reason for Elendil to join her, and maybe even the Queen to go and have an interest in the Southlands too. All paths seem like they're going to converge there. And then we go over to the Harfoots for the first time this episode, where the group are all dressed up in their ceremonial clothes for their big festival ceremony thing. Nori's dad's foot still isn't better, and it's not looking good for the family. There's a big risk that they're going to end up falling behind and being left behind, which seems very brutal, but Dad seems quietly confident that they're all going to be fine. And after a bit of wholesome reminiscing, just to make us feel for these characters, he declares that they are all going to make it to the Grove, every member of the family, and that they'll stay at the front of the caravan to prevent themselves getting left behind. Plus, they have Nori, who's totally been very reliable thus far. What could go wrong? And speaking of Nori, she has a bit of fun banter with Poppy before she breaks into the village elder's caravan to steal his star charts, because helping her giant friend is much more important than helping her family at the present time. She gets the charts and the big ceremony thing starts, first with a warning that the moon is full and so please don't have sex out in the open where anybody can see you, before they have an in memoriam section, where they remember those who died or fell behind and thus probably died. With such deaths as stuck in the snow of a mountain pass and probably froze or got eaten by wolves, Poppy's whole family who got taken out by a landslide, somebody who tried to save her child, somebody that got eaten by wolves, and then a guy who was stung to death by bees, whom they laugh about and call an idiot. Ooh, a bit harsh. But anyway, whilst this is all going on, Meteor Man somehow infiltrates the camp and steals Nori's charts. Don't know how he knew where to look for them, but okay. And then he looks at them near the fire, and he sets them on fire by accident, panics, and gets tangled up in a tarp and frightens the entire village before speaking the only word he knows. Nori. Outing her to everybody for helping him. So she basically gets an instant trial from the Harfoots, who yell at her for lying and stealing and endangering the group, and then after a tense moment where it seems like she's going to be left behind, her family are sentenced to having their cart at the back of the caravan. And surely it's a bit harsh to punish everybody for the crimes of one family member though. And I guess that just goes to show why Poppy's so hesitant to help her earlier. She doesn't want her to get caught and lose the only real family she has left to permanent banishment. But then we return to Numenor, where Elendil and his children have all gotten together for dinner. And after explaining why Galadriel is in Numenor, Elendil then has to deal with a lot of news from his kids. The first being that Isildur wants to defer his sea trial, which is only 9 days away, and this is after their relations have already invited themselves over to celebrate with a big party. Whoopsie. Anyway, as you might expect, his dad doesn't take it all that well, especially when Isildur brings up Anarion, Elendil's other son, who from this conversation has a strained relationship with dear old dad, and who is probably on the mysterious western shores of Numenor, an area that Elendil doesn't want Isildur to go, so yeah. Honestly, that's probably just plot threads for like season 2. I don't see that character playing any major role going forward this season, there's just so much more to address. Like I said earlier, I think this storyline all leads to the Southlands for now. Anyway, Elendil rants at Isildur for a little while before openly yelling at his daughter, but it's all good because she immediately forgives him because she's gotten a letter accepting her into the Builders Guild, which puts them all in a better mood, except for Isildur, who leaves to sulk. We then cut to Numenor's prison, where Galadriel decides to pay Halbrand a visit. They share some banter, before Galadriel reveals that she did some digging into the crest that he wears around his neck, and that she tells him that he is the lost king of the Southlands, which he isn't too thrilled about, as like he tells her, his ancestors served Morgoth, and he isn't a hero. He doesn't want to be the king. But she tells him that those facts no longer matter, even though she has used the fact that his people served Morgoth against him previously. But now that she knows he's a king, suddenly he's useful again, I guess. So she tries to connect with him and tells him that soon she will have an army and ships to return to Middle-earth, and that together they can fight Sauron's forces and free the Southlands. Whilst over in the Royal Tower, the Queen Regent goes to speak to her father, just to let him know that shit is about to go down. But of course, we don't see his face just yet, so I'm guessing that's also going to be a reveal. Back to the Harfoots, it's not looking good for the Brandyfoots, who are falling far behind the caravan, only to be saved by the arrival of Meteor Man, who declares that Nori is his friend, and thus she bargains with him. If he helps them push the cart, she will help him find the stars that he needs. And so, they all live another day. And so from this heartwarming scene, we go to a horrifying scene as we see the elves attempt to prison break. And whilst the action here is very awesome, it clearly doesn't go well, as after some initial success killing a guard and burning others by snatching off their hoods, the first guy to break his chain instantly gets tomahawked. Woof! A few people then get dragged inside in a chain tug of war to their probable deaths, and so Arondir has to smash in the roof of the tunnel to let in more sunlight. And then a warg gets released and basically kills all the elves except the commander and Arondir, who gets revenge on the dude who killed his friend earlier by shivving him with a stick. The commander then manages to break his own chain and then instantly gets sniped and dies. Whew. And this scene's just so beautifully anticlimactic. You have so much hope for these guys, hope that they're about to escape, they're going to warn the elves, and then it all just gets snuffed out in an instant. Delicious. Also, this scene was so much more gruesome than I expected, especially when the deranged Chihuahua warg got sent out to play. Anyway, Arondir is spared through the power of plot armor, and is dragged off to meet Adar, whoever that's going to end up being. The shot's blurry, but it does look like an elf of some sort, and I also doubt it's Sauron. I feel like that's too early. And so yeah, that's the end of the episode, and I very much enjoyed this one. Aside from a few minor quibbles, it was mostly good, and I honestly think this show's really hitting its stride and improves each week. But of course, with all that being said, these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of the episode? Do you like it, hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.